I want to update you on the debt ceiling situation. We are now days away from the Treasury Department not being able to continue paying the bills that Congress has already made decisions on. This is past stuff, as I will continue to repeat. This is not new spending, but the GOP is saying we won't raise the debt ceiling, which is how the Department of the Treasury is able to continue fulfilling the country's financial obligations, unless Biden and the Democrats concede to a bunch of wish list items of Republicans, namely spending cuts to crucial programs. They refuse to, as we'll get to, increase revenue through more proper and reasonable taxation of those at the top of the economic ladder, but they want to cut lots of spending to programs that benefit the working class. And so as they're trying to get those spending cuts, we're getting closer and closer, because they're refusing to raise the debt ceiling until they get those concessions, to a disastrous economic situation because of a default on the country's debt. And a lot to get into in this segment on that subject, starting with a Lincoln Project ad. Lincoln Project being the organization of former Republicans that left the GOP in the Trump era, and they call out MAGA Republicans. And they put together an ad raising awareness about and making the case for the fact that, number one, this is a GOP manufactured crisis. Doesn't have to be a crisis. We don't have to be in this scary moment where we could be in a disastrous economic situation very soon. It's all manufactured to try to leverage their power to get certain items in regard to spending, even though the debt ceiling has nothing to do with future spending. It's just past spending. We've said it all. And actually, the Lincoln Project makes the case that that's the point. The GOP is trying to crash the economy to hurt Biden. I wouldn't go that far. I think they're okay with playing with fire like they are, playing these games, risking that economic situation because Biden's president. They would never dare to do that under someone like Trump. They didn't. They raised the debt ceiling 3 times. They didn't play these games. But I don't think the ultimate goal is to crash the economy. But if that ends up happening, they're more okay with it because Biden's president. He'll get more of the blame. They would never dare to do this under a Republican president. So with that being said, here's this from the Lincoln Project, then we'll discuss.
Kevin McCarthy, Matt Gaetz, and Marjorie Taylor Greene are ready to wreck the economy. Ready to put your job and your family in economic danger. Ready to blow up your pension and retirement and raise prices on everything you buy. Cutting benefits to veterans, slashing defense, ending infrastructure projects. Their reckless conspiracy to bankrupt America is a cynical plan to re-elect Donald Trump by crashing the economy. Call your member of Congress today and tell them yes on saving America's economy and no on McCarthy's plan to kill it.
So they wrote when posting this on Twitter in the caption, blowing up your pension, raising taxes on everything you buy, and bankrupting our economy. Speaker McCarthy and the rest of the extremist GOP will do anything to get Trump reelected. The GOP owns this crisis. Hashtag Republican default crisis. So again, I think it is hard to imagine from the beginning the goal was to never come to an agreement and allow us to default on our debt. But the reason they are playing with fire like they are right now, trying to get these spending cuts, is because if it ends up ending very poorly with us defaulting on our debt and the associated economic crisis that would be caused by that, then Biden's going to get a lot more of the blame. Again, if it was Trump, as we saw with the 3 times they raised the debt ceiling, then they would not do this. But important what the Lincoln Project, especially trying to call out the fact that this is a Republican crisis. Don't let them convince you that it's just 2 sides couldn't come to an agreement. The Democrats aren't making demands. They're not saying, we want you to give us all these policy items and that's when we'll raise the debt ceiling. And then the Republicans are saying, no, we want these policy items. No, Democrats are saying, raise the debt ceiling clean. We can debate spending when we're making spending decisions. Right now, we're just fulfilling past financial obligations. And with that being said, as we continue to walk through some updates on this, Kevin McCarthy came out of the meeting with Biden today, their most recent meeting, and said this.
The thing I want to tell America, I never wanted to be here. I do not like the idea that you govern by chaos, you govern by a deadline. So all the way back in January, I requested
By the way, I don't know what that little buzzing noise is on this clip, but it has to do with the clip.
meetings with the president after I won Speaker, only on this issue. We always knew this issue was coming. February 1st, I got that meeting, and I sat with the president. I told him, Mr. President, we should work together to find where we could have common ground to raise the debt ceiling, but curve our spending so we stop doing this. And I told the president, there's only two things. Not going to raise taxes, and we're not going to pass a clean debt ceiling. The thing I want to...
So what he's trying to do there, and let me actually read part of this quote. The thing I want to tell you, he says, or tell America, I never wanted to be here. I do not like the idea that you govern by chaos, you govern by a deadline, Kevin McCarthy says. Which is funny because governing by chaos is the unofficial slogan of the House Republican caucus. But he's trying to, again, portray the situation to be one where Biden refused to recognize that a deadline was coming up and we're both having to grapple with this issue and we're just having a hard time and he's not taking it seriously. No, you don't get to threaten every time this debt ceiling issue comes around to crash the country and thus the global economy over wanting to get your dream and wish list policy items through. That's not how this is going to work. And it is so irresponsible and so dishonest to do what the GOP is currently doing, at least the House Republicans here. And then here at the beginning of their most recent meeting, Biden said this.
We need to cut spending, but here's the disagreement. I think we should be looking at tax loopholes and making sure the wealthy pay their fair share. I think revenue matters, as well as long as you're not taxing anybody under $400,000. And so we still have some disagreements, but I think we may be able to get where we have to go. We both know we have a significant responsibility. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Speaker. Kevin, it's all yours.
Well, I thank the president for spending time. We had a very productive conversation yesterday, even though he was coming back from the G7 meeting.
A little jab there at the end from Kevin McCarthy, it seems like. So Biden's making the point correctly that if you're concerned with debt and thus you want to decrease the deficit, we can have that conversation, but there's two parts of it. There's spending, sure, and revenue. We could increase revenue and we could talk about trying to close loopholes, especially make sure those who make more than $400,000 per year are paying a reasonable amount, are paying a more significant amount, and that also serves to address the problem that Republicans say they're concerned with. But no, it only can come in their mind from food stamps, for example, or Medicaid. It can't come from taxing those who can definitely afford it. And before we get into more on that, Bobby Kogan, who works for the Center for American Progress, just today went in front of the Senate Budget Committee and afterwards came out, recorded a little video explaining some really crucial and interesting facts in regard to this conversation. Here's this, and then we'll discuss.
Hey, my name is Bobby Kogan. I am the Senior Director of Federal Budget Policy at the Center for American Progress. I just testified before the Senate Budget Committee today, and I made two main points. The first is that without the Bush tax cuts, their extensions, and the Trump tax cuts, debt would be declining as a percent of GDP forever. And the second point is that our rising debt is actually due entirely to these tax cuts and not at all to rising spending. Why isn't it spending? Isn't spending going up? It's true spending is going up, but revenues were on track to match that. Revenues were going to be going up, actually keeping pace with rising spending, not due to tax cuts, but due to us just becoming richer and richer as a nation. As we get richer, real incomes rise, and that increases the amount of after-tax income, both for the individual and it increases the tax revenue for the government. It's great, it's a win-win. And so revenue was on track to fully match this spending, but it no longer is after these tax cuts. And if you go and you look at the last time it was projected that we were going to have stable debt, right? If you're like, how do we get from having debt declining for forever to debt rising for forever, and you look at those projections, spending is down, not up, right? Spending is simply lower than the last time you had that projection. So if you ask the Congressional Budget Office, which is kind of the neutral arbiter of these things, if you say, hey, explain to me how we got from there, what did spending do? They'd say spending decreased the debt relative to those old projections. So 100% of it, well, technically more than 100% of it, 100% of it comes from these tax cuts. These tax cuts.
So if they were actually concerned with being fiscally responsible, they would stop pushing for, and in many cases successfully getting through, massive tax cuts that disproportionately benefit those at the top of our economic ladder. I've said it many times, and I will continue to say it. The goal, undeniably, of much of, if not all of the Republican Party is to make the wealthy more wealthy and make the powerful, or keep the powerful as powerful as they are, or make them more, even more so powerful. And it is exactly opposed to the interest of their own constituents, but through branding, they're able to still get a lot of votes from people who actually are voting against their economic interest. We wouldn't be in the situation that we are now on the subject they say they care about, debt and deficit spending, if it weren't for their massive tax cuts that disproportionately went to those at the top of our economic ladder. It's really simpler than they want you to believe that it is, which is pretty fascinating. And one other thing, Bernie Sanders also called out this hypocrisy in a recent video.
One of the things that the American people have got to see through is the absolute hypocrisy of these Republicans who claim to be very, very concerned about our deficit and our national debt. Meanwhile, these are the exact same people today are pushing to repeal the estate tax, which would provide $1.8 trillion in tax breaks for the top 0.1%, very richest people in this country. They want to extend Trump's tax breaks, most of which went to the very wealthy and large corporations, $3.5 trillion. They refuse to allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry, costs us $8 trillion. So these are hypocrites. They claim to be worried about the national debt, but they fight for tax breaks for the rich. In essence, what they are trying to do, Rachel,
it's really unfortunate that, as I've said before, the strength of the Republican Party is their ability to brand themselves. Because I know people who aren't even on the right; they are center or center left, and still buy into the idea that Republicans are the fiscally responsible party. Okay, I like the Democrats socially, and I like a lot of the programs. I like where their heart's at, but at the end of the day, I'm fiscally conservative. How many times have we heard it? Socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And what that means in the mind of many people is fiscally responsible, which we all want to be fiscally responsible. But actually, the irresponsible fiscal policy has been so obviously and blatantly these massive efforts to assist in the wealthy becoming even more wealthy and preventing us from properly and reasonably taxing those who can afford it. You're still going to be so wealthy. It's great. You're fine. You're going to pay a little bit more in taxes. It's all right. And then we would both be able to more properly invest in people, invest in problems that face people, and not have the problem they say they're concerned with in terms of the debt, at least not as we currently experience it. It's pretty wild.